Antonio Pierce asked about his confidence in returning to the Raiders as the head coach in 2025. His answer, I'm under contract. So what does that mean? That plus more on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for December 18th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you're catching the show wherever you find your favorite podcast or if you're checking us out on YouTube. We appreciate that. The show grows each and every day. That's because of your support, Raider Nation. Even in a 2-12 season, your support is outstanding. We definitely appreciate that. And, of course, the job my man Ari is doing behind the scenes on the YouTube page makes my job easy. So I definitely shout out him. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. I'm on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254, and the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line is 707-654-4693. Speaking of Twitter, at your boy Q254, definitely want to shout out everyone who's hit me up. Let me know that they met me on Monday at Allegiant Stadium by the Torch. A lot of us took pictures together. That was dope. Definitely appreciate everyone sending it to me, and I say it to you all the time, man. It's my pleasure to meet you. It's more my pleasure than to meet you than it is for you to meet me. Really, it's awesome just to see the growth and how everyone connects by way of the podcast. So shout out to you. Definitely appreciate you. And of course, any time that you give us listening to the show or watching the show on YouTube is always appreciated. The Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, I mentioned it, 707-654-4693. We'll get all your feedback coming up in segment number 3. A lot of calls, a lot of texts. We'll try to get as many in as possible today because tomorrow we'll have the crossover edition talking all things Raiders and Jaguars, so we won't have any calls again till Friday. So I'll try to squeeze in as many as possible in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about those comments that Antonio Pierce had on Tuesday on the Zoom call after the game on Monday night, talking about his job status and the I'm under contract comments. What does that mean? We'll talk about that. We'll hear from Adam Schefter and also hear a little bit Mark Davis as well when he was at the owners' meetings in Dallas. All that comes up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here at segment number 1, news and notes, as I always do. And we'll go ahead and jump into that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Prize Picks. Right now, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So let's go ahead and start with the bad. The bad, Janarius Robinson, defensive end from the Silver and Black, suspended. Suspended 3 games without pay for violating the NFL substance abuse policy. He was arrested for a DUI back in February. So there's only 3 games left in the season. Sounds like he's done so. Could he appeal it? Sure. But it seems like with the time that's gone by from February to now that, he's probably just going to go ahead and chalk it up, accept it, sit out the 3 games, not get the pay, and then come back next year, whether that's with the Raiders or someone else. Now, again, he could still appeal it, so maybe we'll find out, tomorrow or so that he is, in fact, appealing it. But the NFL sent down the mandate to the Raiders on Tuesday. They sent it over to us and didn't hear anything about an appeal after that. So I'm assuming, and it's just an assumption, that he's not going to appeal. I say that and bring it up because also just the other day, Charles Snowden, defensive end for the Raiders, was arrested on suspicion of DUI. Now, it's got to obviously play out legally, right? It's just suspicion of a DUI. I don't want to get it twisted that, yes, he did get arrested, but as the Raiders said in their statement the other day, they're going to let the legal matters handle themselves before anything else happens, and it's in the league's hands as well. So the league's going to let the legal side of things play out as well. But it just kind of, if it's going for par for the course, it'll probably be a 3-game suspension for Charles Snowden if, in fact, he does get convicted of a DUI and the league finds it, around the same as Janarius Robinson. So I want to go ahead and pass that along off top. Now, back to the good news, and it's not really great news because we know Max Crosby is out for the season, but he had successful surgery on Tuesday, had that tightrope surgery. Dr. Robert Anderson was down in Charlotte, and he took care of it. It was a grade 3 ankle sprain. He suffered it back in week 2 versus the Ravens. Looked like he was getting a lot better. Then in week 14 against Tampa Bay, got hit with it again. He re-aggravated it, so he, in fact, went and had the surgery on Tuesday. Social media had a couple pictures of Max. He was looking like he was good, big smiles. He was in a wheelchair being wheeled in after having the surgery and then laying up on the couch looking like he was pretty comfortable as well. So If the tightrope surgery sounds familiar, well, it should. Brock Bowers, if you were paying attention to college football last year, Brock Bowers had that surgery while he was there at Georgia. And it's funny, the typical recovery time is 4 to 6 weeks. And all expectations are Max Crosby is going to be good to go for 2025. And there's no doubt, especially if you just look at the 4 to 6 weeks that it takes for, most athletes to come back from the tightrope surgery. But if you think about how long it took Brock Bowers to come back, it wasn't even that. He returned to play for Georgia 26 days after undergoing the surgery. That's right. He had the tightrope surgery and came back 26 days later to help Georgia go on their playoff run. Or their run at the end of the season, I should say, on their way to try to make it to the playoffs. They didn't get into the college football playoff. They would have got in this year if it had been last year when they had the 12 team, but they didn't make it in. But he still came back 26 days after having that surgery. So Max Crosby, the way that he works, is there any doubt that he's going to be back in time? No, not at all. So everything looks good on the heel up front when it comes to Max Crosby. Unfortunately, he's still out for the rest of the season. Also out for the season, Sincere McCormick. Talked about him on Tuesday's show. The running back out of UTSA finally getting an opportunity to shine. And, well, his opportunity looks like it's done. He left the game on Monday with an ankle sprain. Antonio Pierce had mentioned that it wasn't good. And then Sincere McCormick took to social media on Tuesday, let it be known that he was out for the season.
Hey, y'all, I just want to, give a shout out to everybody who, kept me in their prayers. But it's nothing too crazy, though. So, honestly, I'll be back next season. I'm not really even tripping about it. I'll be back better than ever. But I want to thank everybody for reaching out and saying thank you to me, and I appreciate y'all.
So I hate that for Sincere McCormick. I was really hoping to see what he could do the rest of the way, hoping he could stay healthy, because that's been the biggest bugaboo of his career since he's been with the Raiders, drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent back in 2022. Hasn't been able to get on the field until this season due to injury. So unfortunately, that rears its ugly head again, and I hate that for him. I just talked to him in the locker room last week, and he was telling me he was feeling good. The game was starting to slow down to him. He was starting to feel like he was at college again, and then boom, just like that. And we know that's how it is in the National Football League. You're not guaranteed another game. You're not guaranteed another play. And unfortunately for Sincere McCormick, doesn't look like he's going to be back the rest of the season. And who knows what that means for him moving forward. I always say it, and it's the truest thing that can ever be said about the National Football League. Your best ability is availability. And unfortunately for Sincere, he hasn't been available that much so far in the league. Finally, here in segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes of the day. There were some positives that came out of Monday night's game, and that was a few of the players on the defensive side of things in particular that had some pretty good games according to Pro Football Focus. A couple guys on the offensive side as well, but mainly the defense. Robert Spillane graded out as the highest highest Raider graded out at PFF. 86.9. He was flying around. He was making tackles. He was laying some wood, and even got called for a terrible penalty at the end. I thought the roughing the passer penalty, thought that was a pretty soft call that they put on Spillane. But whatever the case may be, he was out there doing what Robert Spillane does. Plus, he came up with the big interception to start the second half of the game. Colton Miller on the offensive line, 82.6 was his grade. Trayvon Merrick playing the safety role up by the line of scrimmage, 78.4. Divine Diablo, other linebacker, playing side-by-side with Robert Spillane, 74.4. And then Jordan Meredith, other offensive lineman, playing side-by-side with Colton Miller, 72.2. The one thing that stands out to me about those guys, Spillane, free agent. Trayvon Merrick, free agent. Divine Diablo, free agent. You're saying Colton Miller, free agent after 2025. And I have to look at Jordan Meredith. I'm not 100% sure if they signed him on a 1-year deal or if he's on a 2-year deal. But the majority of those guys still getting after it. When people say, what are they out there playing for? A lot of those guys are all in contract years. Spillane, Merrick, Diablo for sure. And as I mentioned, Colton Miller will be a free agent after the 2025 season. So that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. News and notes, a little housekeeping here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 2, we'll hear from Antonio Pierce, what he has to say about his job status. We'll hear from Adam Schefter, what he had to say about AP's job status when he was on the Pat McAfee show. And we'll also hear a little bit from Mark Davis, the Raiders owner. That's all coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a couple great sponsors here on the show, including FanDuel. And it's never too late to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And really, the closer it gets to the playoffs, the better, right? It really gets you some money. And all new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel. It's an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I also want to remind you that it's that time of year. What time of year is that? The college football playoff. It is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into the first matchup, SMU, Southern Methodist University Mustangs, battling out with Penn State, the Nittany Lions, at noon. Then, the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate, live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Hate that we're having conversations about Antonio Pierce and his job status. Obviously, we've been having these conversations here on the show for quite a while. There's been a lot of should he come back, should he not come back, he is coming back, he isn't coming back, want him back, don't want him back. We've had a lot of those back and forths, but we saw what it looked like on Monday Night Football, and at some point you knew he was going to be asked in the media about his job security, how he's feeling about it, and on Tuesday, that time was then when a couple of reporters, I believe Mark Anderson from the AP and then Vinny Bonsignore from the RJ, followed up as well about his job status. So here's the question first thrown out there from Mark Anderson talking about the conversations that AP has had with Mark Davis.
AP, in your discussions with Mark Davis, have you gotten a sense of where he stands as far as your status goes?
Me and Mark Davis talk often, and the conversation's been the same as they always are. Very positive.
Do you feel like you'll be back next year? Do you feel like you've made that case for yourself?
I'm under contract.
So you hear him right there. He's talking about the conversations with Mark Davis are always really positive, and then you hear his follow-up with Vinny saying that I'm under contract. Now, I'll tell you, as a guy sitting on the Zoom call on Tuesday when he was asked those questions, they were met with some long pauses. And then, okay, well, where do you go after this, right? Where do you go after that question, right? And just kind of as a matter of fact, he didn't get into anything too major, just said, I'm under contract because, well, he is. Now, we all know that being under contract doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, the Raiders are paying who? John Gruden, paying Josh McDaniels, right? If they move on from AP, they'll be paying him. There's multiple coaches right now that Mark Davis is paying, and not only just head coaches, but other staffers as well. So the contract doesn't mean anything. We know that, but that was the only way that he really could answer it unless, he got into why he was going to come back. And, of course, he's not going to do that. Just let it be known, I'm under contract. That was his confidence level right there. But, of course, it's going to be something that's going to be paying attention to, especially as the season winds down. We all know that Black Monday comes and a handful of coaches get relieved of their duties, and then there's always one or two that get relieved of their duties that we didn't see coming. But Adam Schefter from ESPN was on the Pat McAfee show, and this was actually before Monday, and he was being asked about Antonio Pierce and where he thought about his job status. And I thought Schefter had some good thoughts and some good points that he brought up about it as well. Check it out.
For Antonio Pierce, I think last week when Mark Davis spoke at the owners' meetings, I think it was pretty apparent that Antonio Pierce's future is unsettled. He was asked about the general manager, the head coach. He said he's viewing them separately, not as a package deal, with the Raiders having hired Tom Telesco during the offseason, made it very clear that each guy will be judged independently of one another. And he also said, I'll get to everything after the season. Like, if an owner is going to stand behind a guy, he stands behind a guy. Mark Davis didn't stand behind Antonio Pierce. So until he does, I think that's a question. It's also a little bit unfair to AP, considering all the quarterback drama that they've been through. They haven't had a quarterback this year. And so if Mark Davis, that's what he decides to do, well, again, Antonio Pierce was fighting a fight this year with one hand at least tied behind his back. Like, how are you going to do that when you don't have the quarterback? Was it their fault that the 6 quarterbacks went right in front of them in the draft and none of them were left when their turn rolled around? And I mean, it just was a tough thing to do. So they didn't have the type of quarterback play that I think it's fair to judge Antonio Pierce on, but it certainly didn't sound last week like he is an absolute lock to be back at all.
So Shefty kind of brought up what I've been talking about quite a bit, that Antonio Pierce has dealt with a lot. But as we all know, it doesn't matter what you deal with, right? I mean, look, the Houston Texans, they fired Lovie Smith after he won the game that made them get the number 2 overall pick instead of the number 1 overall pick, which actually ended up being the best thing for him because they ended up with C.J. Stroud instead of Bryce Young. And C.J. Stroud obviously led him to the playoffs the rookie year, and he still got fired because they were so angry that he went out and did that. Now, regardless if it would have worked out for him or not in the long haul, who knows? But it's just funny how these kind of situations happen. And, AP hasn't had steady quarterback play. AP has dealt with a ton of injuries. AP does have multiple coordinators. But, as I've said it before, the coaches, that's on him. Regardless of, how or who made the call on Gardner Minshew, I know AP said that it was his call. I tend to believe sometimes that you got to just follow the money and he'll give you the answer that you want. But again, that's just me spitballing and being around the league long enough to know how these things play out sometimes. So, there's a lot there. And you heard Adam Schefter also say that Mark Davis, when he was at the owners' meetings in Dallas, and this is around the 11th, so about a week ago today when he was there, this is when the other ownership got approved and him selling off a little bit of the minority ownership of the Silver and Black got approved. Of course, he was asked about Antonio Pierce. He was asked about Tom Telesco. He was asked about Tom Brady. And it sounded like he gave a pretty good review on Telesco, even though the evaluation is going to come at the end of the year. Obviously, Tom Brady, he's very high on and wants him to be a big part of the team moving forward. But he did not, just like Adam Schefter said, he did not take that opportunity to fully endorse Antonio Pierce. Matter of fact, he wasn't ready to make any kind of call on that at all. Here's Mark Davis, a couple minutes of what he had to say at the owners' meeting in Dallas last week.
Mark, last time we talked to you earlier on in the season, obviously where the team stands now, 2-11. How would you kind of assess where the team stands and more big picture? How do you feel about Antonio Pierce as he gets close to going into the second year as head coach?
Well, I think you guys can answer where we're at just as good as I can. I'm very disappointed, obviously. We want to see progress and things of that nature. There's no excuses. We have had injuries and all of those things, but the team figures out how to get around those issues. The bottom line, as I've said all along, comes to me, and if there could be finger pointed, it's me. Because again, I'm the one who's hiring the people to make the decisions on the field and everything. There's a misconception that I'm making a lot of decisions on the football field and everything else, and I continually tell you all that I don't, that I do delegate to the people that I hire. I give them goals, and then get out of the way and let them try to do it and let the results speak for themselves. And at this point, obviously we're not happy, but you have to go through the season and then you evaluate. And right now I'm not in that position of evaluating anything going forward.
You had mentioned Tom playing a role in the football operations, and that was going to be, determined as time went on.
Correct.
Can you anticipate that he's going to be?
Well, one of the things is when Tom was hired, I promised that to Fox that we would not get in the way of Tom's job, that he's going to be able to create and be one of the best announcers in the game. And that anything that he does with the Raiders will become in the future as far as that goes. Obviously, I talk to him all the time, and his input is greatly valued and will always be valued. And we'll see as time goes on how his role evolves in here. But he's very excited about it. But again, we're respecting his obligations to Fox.
I'm just curious, in your mind, have you figured out how much of a voice, Mark, that you want Tom to have?
I want Tom to have a huge voice. No question about it. And again, like I said, it's part of building the infrastructure of the organization, which is something that we didn't have a football person on that side of it. That's not a coach or a general manager, but somebody that can oversee the whole picture. And I believe Tom, in time, will be the person that can do that.
In talking to people who know Tom and work with Tom, one of the things when I've asked him, what do you think he brings to the table, is they said that he understands excellence on every part of the team, not just on the field. Do you get that in your conversation?
No question about it. And he's competitive, but he's very thorough in everything that he does. He's got a great ability to communicate on a level that people can understand and not try to talk over them. I'm excited and really grateful that he's a part of the Raider organization.
What are some of the things that has impressed you about Tom Telesco as a general manager?
He's very even-keeled. He knows talent pretty damn well. He had a good draft for us last year. I think our first 3 picks are starting now. He does a good job.
And when it comes to, last question for me, I know you say you're still evaluating things this season, but when it comes to Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco, are you evaluating them as separate entities in terms of how Telesco's doing on his?
Yeah, they didn't come in as a team, and that's so they are individuals.
So clearly wasn't any kind of ringing endorsement. I don't think that there was really too much else he could say unless he was going to come out and say, yeah, AP's coming back next year. There's no doubt about it. If he wasn't going to say that, and there's going to be conversations to be had, and we all know that there will be, that's really all that he could say. But to the point of Tom Telesco, where, he said that he does some good things and also that they're going to be judged separately, not together. They didn't come in together. And we talked about it here on the show when the whole head coach, GM, that hiring process went down. It was supposed to be what was told to us. What Mark Davis himself said is he wanted to do it in the right order of operations. Hire the GM, then hire the head coach. That's when I thought it was going to be Champ Kelly and it was going to be Antonio Pierce. Instead, it ended up being Antonio Pierce gets hired as the head coach, and then they go in a different direction with the GM and goes to Tom Telesco. And from all my understanding, the reasoning for that was Mark Davis didn't want to have 2 new guys. 2 guys that had never been there, done that. So he didn't want to have a GM that was only an interim GM or a head coach that was only an interim head coach. It was one or the other, not both. So he went with Antonio Pierce as the head coach and, elevated him to the full-time head coach, but then brought in a GM with experience. And so that's the understanding that I have from it. But with that being said, it's almost like now Tom Telesco's in a position where he could sit back and after being evaluated, we'll probably sit down with Mark Davis, sit down with Tom Brady and others and make a decision on Antonio Pierce when Antonio Pierce was the guy that was there before him. But again, the order of operations was just incorrect. They didn't do it the right way, even though they ended up elevating Antonio Pierce. And I guess it's really all that they could do. It just didn't play out the way that Mark Davis wanted it to play out. And again, you can hear in his voice that it didn't. There's reasoning for what's been going on with the AP and the team this season. But like he said, he's not going to allow injuries to be a factor, right? And just like we talked about here on the show, it's not an excuse. I've asked, how much weight does it carry with you? Well, it doesn't sound like injuries carry too much weight with Mark Davis, as other teams, obviously the Lions, are dealing with a ton of injuries, 18 guys on IR, even though they have more depth, and they're not to the players that the Raiders have had where they're on quarterback 3. They're still on their quarterback 1 with Jared Goff. But again, you can't compare team to team to team. It's about the Raiders, about the silver and black, not about anyone else in the league. But not a huge, ringing endorsement for Antonio Pierce by Mark Davis. And it kind of just leans to the conversation of, it feels like it's inevitable that at the end of the season, he's going to be out of there after conversations with Mark Davis and the powers that be. But again, that evaluation and that sit down will come at the end of the season sooner rather than later. AP didn't sound a whole hell of a lot of confidence behind him coming back in 2025 either. And that's why he said, I'm under contract because, well, he is. Coming up, segment number 3, what's on your mind? Your calls and texts are next at 707-654-4693. That's on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a couple more sponsors here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, including the title sponsor of Prize Picks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy, whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports. Prize Picks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money as fast as 15 minutes. This week, you can look at maybe Jared Goff for more than 230 yards passing or Saquon Barkley for more than a touchdown. It's quick, it's simple, it's so much fun. You've got to challenge yourself and challenge your friends. Right now, download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. I also want to tell you about Rocket Money. Think about this. Did Rocket Money ever help you find any subscriptions you forgot that you were paying for? Or maybe you were paying for it twice and you didn't know it? It just brought it to your attention. Subscriptions, how easy is it to be paying for them and forget that you're actually paying for them? Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts are off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Start off with a call from ABA Ivan Davis. He's calling to talk about what he feels was taken away from the Raiders on Monday Night Football by officiating. Here he is, ABA Ivan Davis.
What's up, Q? This is ABA Ivan Davis again. Man, they took that game from us. That BS call took a minute or something off that clock. We got all the way down to the 30-yard line and had to throw it into the end zone. That's the only reason we lost that game. We would have came back and won that game had they not made that call. We would have had 2 minutes, would have had plenty of time to go down and get a touchdown. Again, I'm going to say it again. Stop the conspiracy theory. You don't have to do that no more. That era is long dead gone. Okay, and so, I mean, maybe if they made the calls against other teams like that, I wouldn't cry. But it seems like that we the ones that get burned, at least the last few times. The Kansas City Chiefs. But anyway, so be it. Okay, I mean, this game was there for the taking. But anyway, you know, I'm a little irritated. All right. Talk to you later, Q. Go Raiders.
Thank you for the call, my man. It's always good to hear from you. And I'm assuming you're talking about the Spillane personal foul, that roughing the quarterback late in the game. Look, that was a bad call. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think any of us in our right mind think that the Raiders deserve to win that game. Atlanta was trying to give it away. There's no doubt about that. They were not very good as they only scored 15 points. They had multiple block kicks, blocked the extra point, had a safety, and still only came up with 15 points. So there's a reason why Kirk Cousins has been benched, and Michael Penix is now going to get the action because they just weren't getting it done offensively. But that was, again, it was a bad call, but the Raiders had multiple chances to score. The Raiders had multiple chances to win that game, and ultimately they didn't do it. So I think that's what you're talking about. And yeah, because it kind of sounded like you didn't want to sign up for the official's fault, but then it also sounded like you did want to sign up for the official's fault. So you know how your boy gets, man. Sometimes I get confused, but thanks for the call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Jason in the 304. It said, Q, it's Raider Jason from the 304. Here's my feedback from recent events. 1, I haven't been calling for AP's job. However, that performance on Monday was probably the nail in the coffin, as you say. We need continuity at head coach, but I just can't see him surviving now. 2, the play calling was very questionable, to say the least. Also, the special team debacles are inexcusable. 3, I'm not all that pumped up about the prospect of Tom Brady getting involved with player personnel. That's what Tom Telesco and Champ Kelly are there for. We just had the best draft in a decade. What do you say? As always, love the show. Thanks for all the coverage during a miserable season. Just win, baby, and go Raiders. That's Jason, Raider Jason, in the 304. Thanks for the text. I appreciate you. And yeah, that's the thing. When it comes to Tom Brady and Mark Davis wanting him to be in so much charge of what's going on, there's no guarantee that that's going to go fantastic, right? I mean, I say it all the time. I'm from the era, and I live in, and I will die saying Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player to ever do it. And I know that there's an argument. There's an argument for an older player. There's an argument for a younger player, right? I get that. And that's fine. Whatever era you grow up in, whoever you think is the greatest of all time, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be really good at player personnel. As I go back to my Michael Jordan, example, he was a terrible owner. Didn't draft very good players. Didn't hire very good coaches. Like, he just didn't do things like that at a very good level. It's the reason why he eventually sold the team, right? He just wasn't very good at that. And a lot of times, all-time greats aren't that good at certain areas because they think that everyone's supposed to be on their level, and they're not. So Tom Brady might be fantastic at it, and he might all of a sudden help roll in a great roster for the Raiders, but he also might not be. And if not, how far back could that possibly set the team? That's a big question. I mean, only thing we can see and only thing we can really do, Jason, is to sit back and watch and to see how it all unfolds. My biggest question when it comes to Brady is not even that, is how much attention do you put on Fox being a broadcaster and how much attention do you put on player personnel? And I get it. The season will be over. You get into the offseason. Then you can worry about free agency, this, that, and the other. But all that scouting goes on now. You know, what we do on Saturdays, and I say we, I'm just saying, you know, Saturdays and all this college football and watching the playoffs and all that, while he's preparing for a game, scouts are out there at those games. He's not at those games, right? And you can go and look at highlights, but highlights are highlights, right? So it's just how much time do you dedicate to both is going to be a big question. So I don't know. I think at some point he's either going to have to choose broadcasting or player personnel as far as ownership goes. And I don't know what decision he'll make. It's a lot of money Fox is paying him. But thanks so much for that text, my man. Definitely appreciate you. And to say that I've had the same concerns would be an understatement. Up next, got a call from Raider Jay and SoCal by way of the 5 and Dime, the 510. He's calling to talk about Monday's podcast, or Tuesday's podcast, I should say, Monday's game and the feeling that I had while I was watching the game and what it looked like, and also wants to talk about the defense. Here he is, Raider Jay and SoCal by way of the 510.
What up, Q? Raider Jay out of SoCal by way of the 510. I was just following up on your podcast from last night's game. Honestly, what you were mentioning about AP and everything and everybody in the building, the team itself looking lifeless, I think that's spot on. To use a phrase I think he uses pretty often is he always talks about not letting go of the rope. Last night looks like they let go of the rope, man. Not in the sense that I don't think the guys want to play for him anymore. I think he's just so defeated by how the season has gone. You know, he stepped into it as a first-year head coach, and I really feel like it's just gotten to be too overwhelming for him, you know. Even for a seasoned veteran head coach, the injuries and whatnot would all be a lot to handle, but for a first-year head coach with so much riding on what he needed to do to make sure that he had a successful tenure, it all just went south immediately. So, you know, I think it's just gotten to the point where it's been too overwhelming for him. And, you know, hey, maybe it's a big learning lesson for him, and he can hopefully build on it going further. I thought he would be back after this year, but like you said, man, there's just too many things that have been going wrong that whether they're in his control or not, he ultimately has to take the fall for it. So I just don't think he's hit all the marks he would need to come back at this point. With that being said, I turn my attention to the defense. That's really my sole focus. The offense is what it is. I think I called about it maybe last week or so, but I'm mainly focused on seeing who on the defense steps up. I think the rest of the season should be used similarly to how the Denver Broncos rode out the season last year. They traded away a lot of vets. In our case, we didn't have to trade anybody away. You know, most of our guys are hurt. So a lot of young guys are getting playing time, and I just think it's an opportunity for us to either see development from them or figure out whether or not they should be on the roster next year. With that being said, since Tom Telesco is going to have some pretty tough decisions to make in terms of the roster, given that there will be coaching turnover, assuming that there will be, who would you think the Raiders should go out and get? Because I assume Patrick Graham wouldn't be back, although I do love what Patrick Graham has done for our defense. If there is a head coaching change, I don't think PG stays. So who do you think's out there as a defensive coordinator mind to go get? I heard rumors about Vrabel becoming the head coach. I wouldn't love that, but, you know, if it is what it is, I'm sure he would have his own say in who the players are. So, yeah, how do you see the defense shaking out next year? And then who do you think the defensive coordinators would be that we should look at, assuming that we don't get a defensive coordinator head coach? Appreciate all that you do, Q. Go Raiders.
Thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you, my man. And, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that Tom Telesco has to do is look at the current free agents. See who's going to make the most sense. A lot of potential free agents, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that they have to make a decision on if they're coming back or not. And again, that goes back to your point of, is Patrick Graham coming back or not? You know, outside of the building, you could always find free agents that fit. I don't think, and this is just me spitballing, I don't think the Raiders are going to spend a ton of money. I think they're going to try to evaluate their roster, see what they need, see their guys that they can bring back, right? Try to do some obviously some heavy lifting in the draft and try to fill some voids with free agents. I don't think that they're going to try to fill a roster full of free agents. And I never think that that's a very good approach to roster building. They do have a lot of money, so if they want to make a splash like a Christian Wilkins they did last year, they'll have the money to do that. But they also have their own guys to worry about as well. So we'll see how that plays out as far as positions, especially on defense, that I think need to be addressed. Cornerback probably needs to be addressed. Linebacker probably needs to be addressed. Maybe the interior, if you're not bringing John Jenkins or Adam Butler back. Adam Butler would be the one I really want to bring back, but, who knows what his asking price is going to be. Is Tyree, has he developed enough for you to feel comfortable with him at the edge position? Is Chase on a factor there, right? I mean, what's the deal, right? These next 3 games, I think, will help evaluate a little bit for Tom Telesco, but make no mistake about it, he's been evaluating this roster since he arrived at the beginning of the year. So we'll see what happens moving forward with this team. But I think the first order of approach is Tom Telesco has to evaluate the Raiders free agents and who he thinks makes the most sense to return. Thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from TM Jones in Vegas. He says, Q, TM Jones from Vegas, this one of the few times I have to disagree with you. The D stepped up big time on Monday Night Football. 1 offensive touchdown on a gamble by Jack Jones that he got burned on. That's it. The D could have folded numerous times after the pick, after the safety, after the main 3 and outs. Just 15 points, given up with no Mad Max. Pierce is a defensive coach, and the defense has kept them in most games, and they've suffered the majority of injuries the Raiders have suffered. The Bucs scored 40 against the supposedly vaunted Chargers D. The Raiders shut them down after the slow start. If the Raiders had truly given up, it would have been a get-right game for the Falcons offense, and they suffered Raiders, and they've suffered. The Raiders would have gotten blown out because the O with Ritter was bad. Key drops by Mayer and Myers didn't help, and he overthrew an open Bowers on a deep pass. Anyway, keep up the good work. I'm still pro Pierce. That's TM Jones in Vegas. Thanks so much. And, hey, look, disagreeing with me is fine. And I didn't say that they gave up. I just felt like the season became just too much. It looked like they were overwhelmed. As Jacoby Myers told me in the locker room, this has been a lot this season, right? It just felt like it all just kind of crashed down and it couldn't happen. It couldn't get right. The game couldn't get right. The energy was never there. The feel was never there. And again, this is from someone who's sitting in the building, and they didn't give up a whole bunch of points. But also, the Atlanta offense was terrible. Atlanta's offense was awful. There's a reason why Kirk Cousins got benched. Like, how many times have you heard about a quarterback getting benched after they won a game and they're in the playoff mix, and they bring in a rookie quarterback who hasn't had any burn? Like, think about that. Again, I'm not trying to disagree with you or start an argument. Just think about the other side of things. Kirk Cousins, the starting quarterback, who they paid a whole lot of money to, got benched after a victory. They're in the thick of things when it comes to the playoffs, and they're going to turn to a rookie who, as I found out last week, has been playing scout team quarterback at best in practice for the Falcons. So that kind of lets you know that, yeah, the Raiders defense kept them in the game. They still had a chance to win at the end, as I mentioned. They never got blown out. But a lot of that had to do with Atlanta's offense was terrible. So there's that. And if you look at the run defense, I mean, Bijan Robinson went for $122, and I believe the rushing in general was like 160-something yards. So there was some leaks in the defense. It wasn't, all sunshine and rainbows, but I get what you're saying. Thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, and we'll close out with this call from Jordan in Oregon. He's calling to talk about the game on Monday night. He brings up Murphy's Law. What could go wrong will go wrong. Here's Jordan in Oregon.
What's going on, Q? Jordan in Oregon. Wanted to call in here. Appreciate your honesty on the podcast here day after Monday Night Football. I don't think you could have said it better, man. It's just that the look on Mark's face, the look on AP's face, the general just consensus, feeling across the board of that Allegiant Stadium. Atlanta's no big shot or anything, but man, this team, like you said, man, it's that vibe of a bad relationship. It's just dumb. There's really, that's the best way to put it. But hey, I wanted to point out something. There's an old term called Murphy's Law. What can go wrong will go wrong. And I've always found that saying intriguing, because certain situations in life, or sports or whatever, that Murphy's Law comes into effect, and you got to feel for AP, because in the sense that what could go wrong did go wrong. I mean, from the quarterback to look at our defense now as far as who's playing, to just getting anything to take off offensively. And it goes back to, I called in a week or so ago and talking about, not everything's always fair in this league, and AP very well might not get what a lot of fans were hoping would be like a fair shot. Get his quarterback, get get his guys. And one thing I wanted just to say with that is that when a coach has everything not go their way, like what's happened to the Raiders this year, you would always hope that there's some tangible that coach brings to the table that makes you hang your hat on. Like there has to be, something about the team, whether, look at the improvement on the defense or gosh, look what the coach has done as far as, discipline or this and that. And I just have to say with AP, the problem that I see with is that there's just nothing, as far as like an attribute that he's brought to this team where it's like, hey, everything didn't go our way, but you know what? He rallied these guys. The one thing you will hear sometimes is they sure play hard. But to me, honestly, you can't just use that. And so I got to say it's looking to me like this is probably going to be a one and done, just a guess for me with AP. And it sucks because, Raider Nation, everybody wanted this to work out, but he looks checked out too, man. And it's just hard to imagine going into 25 and putting all your eggs in that basket again, with just not seeing anything that's tangible, other than the team playing hard. You have to see something more, whether it be that defense rallying or it's just like we're taking a step back everywhere. But anyway, thanks for letting me vent. You appreciate you, bro. Have a good one.
Thanks for the call, my man. And yeah, you very well could be right. I've said it before. I've supported AP. It just seems like everything is snowballing downhill for him. And honestly, it felt like that snowball became very big on Monday Night Football. It just really did. And even talking to him on Tuesday on the on the press call Zoomer, the Zoom press call, whatever you want to call it, it just felt like it was heavy on his shoulders, right? And look, when you're on a 10-game losing streak, it's supposed to be heavy on your shoulders. You're supposed to be overwhelmed. You're supposed to not look forward to talking to the media or anything. I mean, you're just trying to figure out how to win a game in general. And so I get it. I don't blame him for it. It's just the reality of it. So yeah, that Murphy's Law, that's kind of what it feels like, right? If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. And it's gone wrong a lot for the Silver and Black. So thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. I got a text from John in the South Bay in L.A., but it's really lengthy. I don't know if we'll have time for that. And a call from Dominique from the Show Me State. We'll get that on Friday's show. We'll start off Friday's show in segment number 3 with a text from John in South Bay, LA. And also Dominique has a call from the Show Me State. We'll get those on Friday's show. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have the crossover edition. Tony Wiggins, Amp Wig, the barber. He'll join the show. We'll talk all things Jaguars, talk all things Raiders. We'll deep dive into that, get you prepared for Week 16 action as the 2024 season is starting to wind down. So we'll do that tomorrow. We'll get back to calls and texts, news and notes, and good stuff like that on Friday's show as well, as we close out the week really strong. But that's the plan for the rest of the week, Raider Nation. So until then, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.